Шановні колеги, розпочинаємо наступний брифінг з темою презентація нової доповіді моніторингової місії ООН з прав людини в Україні. І у нас в гостях сьогодні Фіона Фрейзер, голова моніторингової місії ООН з прав людини в Україні. Пані Фіона, прошу.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome and thank you very much for coming to the launch of the 24th report of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on the human rights situation in Ukraine. This report covers the period from the 16th of August to the 15th of November 2018. In my presentation today, I will focus on 5 areas. First, the effects on people of the active armed conflict in the East on both sides of the contact line. Second, detention and deprivation of liberty. Third, access to justice, fair trial, and progress, or rather no progress, in a number of investigations. Fourth, civic space, and by that I mean freedom of media, freedom of expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, association, and freedom of religion. Fifth, the situation in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, occupied by the Russian Federation. So to begin, from mid-August to mid-November, the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine documented 50 civilian casualties, 14 killed and 36 injured. This is 50% less than in the previous reporting period, that was from mid-May to mid-August of this year. Although civilian casualty figures have decreased, there is a human tragedy behind each number. In September, 3 boys were killed and 1 was injured in an explosion triggered by a mine or an explosive remnant of war in no man's land near Horlivka. In October, a mortar shell in Zolote 5 killed both a mother and a daughter. Also that month, 2 civilians, a man and a woman, were killed by an explosion while trying to repair a broken electricity line in no man's land in Zolote 5. Since the beginning of the conflict, more than 3,000 civilians have been killed and between 7,000 and 9,000 injured. Estimates are that over 40,000 civilian homes have been damaged or destroyed in the hostilities. Victims have a right to compensation, yet there is still no comprehensive state policy on compensation and reparation for those who have lost relatives, for those who have been injured, and for those whose property has been destroyed or damaged. We repeat our long-standing recommendation to establish such a policy in accordance with international standards without further delay. Apart from taking lives, health, and homes, the armed conflict affects millions of people in many ways. There are practical steps that the government of Ukraine can and should undertake as soon as possible to alleviate the suffering. Territorial integrity is not only about land, it is even more so about people wherever they are in Ukraine. Freedom of movement. Disproportionate restrictions along and across the contact line contribute to deepening the division of families, friends, and communities. Together with our partners, we submitted comments to the Cabinet of Ministers draft resolution regarding a new procedure for the movement of people and transfer of goods across the contact line. We urge the Cabinet of Ministers to also consider the comments from civil society. This resolution should be the only document to regulate movement across the contact line. Pensions. Pensioners, wherever they live in Ukraine, should have access to this right. In a conflict situation, elderly people are even more vulnerable and reliant on this income. Our recommendation remains the same. Access to a pension should be delinked from IDP registration. There are currently legislative initiatives pending before the Parliament of Ukraine that would enable conflict-affected persons to receive pensions in territory controlled by the government without having to register as IDPs. We call on the Parliament to consider this draft law as a matter of priority. During the reporting period, we documented 40 human rights violations involving unlawful or arbitrary detention, torture, ill treatment, sexual violence and/or threats to physical integrity committed on both sides of the contact line. Lack of effective investigations and prosecutions of perpetrators in each case persist. These are critical systemic issues that must be addressed. We welcome the resumed transfer of pre-conflict prisoners from territory controlled by the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic, and the first such transfer from the territory controlled by the self-proclaimed Luhansk People's Republic. 55 pre-conflict prisoners were transferred on the 12th and 13th of December. They will now serve their sentence in government-controlled territory and will thus have more contact with their families. We commend the dialogue between the parties that resulted in the transfers. We hope the process will continue in 2019 as many more pre-conflict prisoners have expressed their willingness to be transferred to government-controlled territory. As you know, we document human rights violations throughout Ukraine, including in territory controlled by the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and the self-proclaimed Luhansk People's Republic. During this reporting period, however, we had to step up our remote monitoring of the human rights situation there, as our operations were restricted by the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and the self-proclaimed Luhansk People's Republic. Some of our key concerns regarding the human rights situations across the contact line are the following. People remain subject to decisions and structures of administration of justice imposed in violation of the Minsk agreements and the Constitution of Ukraine. First-hand information from former detainees who are now in government-controlled territory indicate that human rights abuses persist in both self-proclaimed republics, such as torture and ill treatment, the practice of a so-called 30-day preventive arrest and administrative arrest that amounts to arbitrary incommunicado detention. Civic space in territory controlled by the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and the self-proclaimed Luhansk People's Republic is highly restricted. No public events were reported apart from initiated by the both self-proclaimed republics. Evangelical Christian denominations were classified as extremist organizations. The journalist Stanislav Asiev, detained in June 2017, remains deprived of his liberty by the Ministry of State Security of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. We reiterate the need for regular, unimpeded, and confidential access to detainees for international observers as an essential safeguard. We continue to enjoy full access to places of detention in government-controlled territory. This photo illustrates our work in Mariupol CISO, which is reflective of all our work in various pre-trial detention centers, e.g. CISOs, where we speak in confidence with people charged with separatism or terrorism-related crimes. This woman has been in pre-trial detention since April 2015, that is 3 years and 9 months. During this reporting period, we documented 43 cases where defendants have been in pre-trial detention for up to 2 years. In many cases, prolonged pre-trial detention is used as a means to exert pressure on a person. We are concerned that in conflict-related cases, pre-trial detention is applied and then prolonged automatically, disregarding the circumstances of an individual case. This has to stop. We thus recommend courts and judges to apply a custodial measure of restraint to persons charged with crimes against national and/or public security in accordance with the case law of the European Court of Human Rights in order to avoid the common practice of automatic detention. We welcome some developments in the investigation of one incident during Maidan protests in 2014. One alleged perpetrator, a sniper from internal troops, was identified and charged with killing. Overall, however, the investigation into the killings of protesters is moving with very little progress. And as for the violent acts in Odessa on the 2nd of May 2014 that led to the death of 48 people, no one has been held accountable for any of these acts. This reporting period saw yet another increase in the number of attacks against journalists, civil society activists, political opponents, and minorities, such as the members of the LGBTQI communities. The attacks are becoming bolder. 2 persons died: Mikola Buchko, an anti-corruption and environmental activist in Kharkiv region, and Katerina Handzuk, staff member of Kherson City Council, known for her anti-corruption views. I would like to stress that impunity for crimes emboldens perpetrators, leading to more violence. We therefore urge law enforcement agencies to appropriately classify all violent attacks, to investigate them effectively and timely. Perpetrators must be held accountable, regardless of their affiliation with extreme right-wing groups or any other entities. In occupied Crimea, the Russian Federation continuously violates its international obligations as an occupying power. In this reporting period, we documented 44 human rights violations in Crimea. These violations include the arbitrary application by the Russian Federation authorities of anti-extremism legislation in Crimea, which has stifled dissent, instilled fear, and denied individuals their freedoms of expression, association, peaceful assembly, and other human rights. Crimean Tatars remain disproportionately affected. During the reporting period, at least 5 Crimean residents, all Crimean Tatars, were sentenced under extremism-related charges for possessing material or posting information on social media deemed extremist or terrorist. Our recommendations to the Russian Federation as an occupying power in Crimea include to ensure access to international organizations, to put an end to imposing Russian legislation, to abide by international humanitarian law. In my concluding remarks, I would like to touch upon 3 significant developments that took place after the end of the reporting period. First, we have followed the situation evolving around and after the 25th of November naval incident near the Kerch Strait. Our primary concern is the human rights of the Ukrainian Navy crew members who were apprehended by the Russian Federation during the incident. We are in contact with lawyers and relatives of some of the crew members. We call upon the Russian Federation to ensure that crew members have regular, unimpeded, and confidential access to lawyers, as well as access to medical care as needed. Second, martial law. We reiterate that any measures restricting human rights during a state of martial law must be limited to the extent strictly required by the exigencies of the situation, meaning they must be proportional and limited to what is necessary in terms of duration, geographic coverage, and material scope. Third, on the 15th of December, 2 days ago, the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church was created, uniting various Orthodox denominations in the country. From the human rights perspective, the government of Ukraine has an obligation to protect freedom of religion or belief for all in the country, regardless their religious denomination or affiliation with religious communities. Finally, looking forward to the presidential and parliamentary elections in 2019, we believe that people and their human rights should be at the center of electoral campaigns and all actions of the elected officials. Thank you very much.
Шановна аудиторія, якщо є якісь запитання до пані
Dear audience, if you have questions to Ms. Fiona, you're welcome to ask them. Then let us express gratitude to the speaker and let us wrap up the briefing.